All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us in the afternoon session. I hope everybody had a good morning session and a good lunch. I'm going to immediately introduce Dave Richard, and I'm going to have to read his bio here because I've not met Dave until about 5 minutes ago, again, subbing today. So Dave is Senior Vice President on McGuire Woods Consulting's North Carolina Government Relations team. They focus on healthcare issues related to state and federal government, payers and providers. We're grateful for his work and time today to facilitate the panel, and I'm going to leave panel introductions to Dave. So with that, thank you.
Thanks so much. It's good to see you all, and those of you in the back, if you really want to come up, you can. There's plenty of seats, so just let you know that. Let me start by saying is that we have a panel of folks from LME MCOs, and I think most people know, but it's really worthwhile. I'm going to take 1 minute to remind folks what LME MCOs are. We use that word fast, and it comes off really rapidly, but it's local management entity managed care organizations. And it's really important to think about that because the local is really important, and they've been that way for a long time. They're all part of a new association called the North Carolina Association of Public Community Health Plans. I want to just mention a couple of things. One, LME MCOs, we hear people say, well, they're tailored plans. Actually, they're not tailored plans. They run tailored plans. They are so much more than just the tailored plans. They have enormous responsibilities for local planning, for behavioral health, IDD, substance use, and traumatic brain injury. They receive state funds, not capitated managed care funds for certain services. Housing often are things that people think about outside of managed care areas. They also have community-based funds coming from counties that help them support the services that they do in that area. And then, of course, the tailored plan part of that is a capitated, fully integrated managed care plan that are run by 4 individual managed care organizations. 2 things are really important to remember, and the reason why we said it's a long name for an association, Public Community Health Plans, but public is really important because they're governed by a board of directors that are a public board of directors. They are people from your local communities, from county commissioners, from other organizations. They're not for-profit organizations. They're actually not non-profit organizations. They're governmental entities that have those boards of directors. And to say community, because I think you're going to hear, as you hear from this group here, they're all part of the community. When you think about, VIA, it's part of the western part of the state. The folks that you hear from, people you hear from these organizations, live in those communities, they understand those communities, and they're part of it. So really important when you think about the LME MCO system, about that community part of this and the public side of it. Now we've got 4 really incredible folks that talk, and I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves because that way, and then they'll take a few minutes to do that, then we'll jump into the questions. So you get to start.
Thank you, Dave. Good afternoon. My name is Celeste Ordaway. I am the Vice President of IDD and MHSU Provider Network at VIA Health. And we cover the 32 counties going from the western side of the state all the way over into Rockingham, Vance County. So great to be with you.
Hello, I'm Ann Oshel. I'm the Senior Vice President of Community Health and Wellbeing at Alliance Health. We cover 7 counties. I used to say that we were contiguous, but we cover a lot in the central North Carolina region and Mecklenburg County.
Good afternoon. I'm Cindy Ellers, Chief of Strategy and Innovation at Trillium Health Resources. Been there about 30 years. I am really excited to be here, and one thing I just want to share is also a mom of children with IDD, so a really unique sort of lens, and I'll share some of that in my remarks today. In addition to that, we cover 46 counties, the entire eastern coast of North Carolina, all the way over to Guilford, Randolph, Anson.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Allison Gazda. I'm the Chief of Clinical Services with Partners Health Management. We, like the rest, are LME MCO. We cover 15 counties that stretch from the Virginia border to the South Carolina border, pretty much in the foothills, western part of the state, and that is what we do.
Great. Those were really quick introductions. Often when you have these panels, you can't get past the introductions to get the questions. So y'all were wonderful at doing that. But we're going to have, the first question we're going to have is for everybody on the panel. And this really is just to give a chance for them to talk about 5 minutes about what's actually happening in your area around housing. So the question is really this: what are your strategic objectives for IDD housing? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And what kind of partnerships do you need to build? And what policies need to change in that period of time? Now, you can answer any part of those questions, but that's really the broader sense of it. What's really going on in housing area? And Allison, we're going to start with you only because we want to go back this way. How's that?
You. So at Partners, I don't know that we have anything super innovative in the sense of here's a named program, because you're going to hear some really exciting things. But one of the things we've really embraced over the last several years is the use of our long-term community supports, which is an in lieu of service definition. And we use that to meet an individual's needs where they're at. And we wrap services, we find housing for them in the community and whatever they need to support them, whether that might be some type of durable medical equipment, some assistive technology, additional, supports in the source of staffing or community resources. So that is what we're doing. But what our vision is for the future is to go more into the use of technologies and how can we use advanced technologies to support our members in their own homes, in their own communities, and living the quality of life that they have. So that's kind of where we're headed, and we're looking at some things you're going to hear from, I think, Cindy to talk about a really cool program, and we hope to expand and use some things of that nature. And in addition, we also, for individuals who have dual diagnosis, we really work in close partnership with our housing department and our transition to community living, which is a DOJ settlement program. And we try to work with, okay, what kind of housing can we find for individuals who might have both a mental illness and an intellectual and developmental disability, and what might those specialized needs be, and how do we meet those needs in the communities? So those are the types of things we're doing, and we want to continue to expand and keep folks, longer in the communities, and like I said earlier, expand their quality of life. So thank you.
Cindy.
All right. So first, I want to say we all have a different view of what inclusion is. And how I see inclusion and living inclusively in the community might be different than the way you do for yourself. And how I see inclusion for my 3 boys who have IDD might also be really different than how you see it for your loved one. And so what I want to do is commit to, I'm not going to judge you, don't judge me. So if I say something you don't think is inclusive by your definition, by mine it may be, and that's okay. First thing, I just needed to say that. So, and I say that because there's not a real one singular definition of inclusive living, right? Some might want to argue that too, but I don't want to do that. What I want to do is say how people want to live is their choice, and what my job is as LME MCO is to make sure that I do everything I possibly can to blend and braid the funding to make that true for them, each and every one of them, whoever they are, that is part of my health plan. So at Trillium, we were the first plan in the state to develop the long-term support community living. It has 5 levels of care: living at home, living in your own home or apartment. Level 3 is living in an AFL or companion living. Level 4 is supervised living, so 3 people or so. And then there's another level of care that's group living. In addition, it mirrors a lot of ways the services that are available in innovations. It is an in lieu of service, in lieu of intermediate care facilities, or ICFs. And so we created that definition probably almost 10 years ago now as a way of mitigating some of the issues people on the innovations waiver wait list had who wanted living arrangements. So that does exist, although it may have some capitation limits from a funding standpoint. In lieu of service definitions is a whole nother session at a different conference. But important to know it exists. And when we think about living in the community, there's lots of levels. That's one way to fund it, innovations waiver. Another way to fund it, blending and braiding specific services together, like some of the eye option services and personal care. Another way to fund it. Just lots of creative ways to fund people to live on their own. And so this has always been the philosophy of Trillium. We always look at what the person's funding is, what they want out of life, and then try to marry those things up and make it happen. So that's just one thing to say about some of the things we do. It's philosophical in that way. We also look at all the different HUD funding, special housing programs, Section 811, whatever it might be that would support a person with disabilities to live in the community, and leverage every single possible resource out there to make that happen, often on fixed incomes like SSI or SSDI. And so it's a lot to know all of those things. That is something that LME MCOs as public systems are really good at understanding the whole picture of funding that's available. One of the things Allison was talking about that Trillium is doing right now is, some of you may have heard about it, the Trillium Ultimate Living Assistance, also known as TULA, which is a device that supports people to live independently, to have autonomy. It is, I'm not going to go, it's a whole session on its own as well, but it is leveraging technology to support people using remote supports and remote monitoring side by side with direct support staff. So not to replace direct support, but to work side by side with direct support. So when the direct support's not there, you always have your remote supports backing up. And you always have access to your goals. You have access to somebody that's making sure you're taking your medicine, making sure they're monitoring those chronic health conditions you may have. It is a wonderful device. We have around 500 people using that today in Trillium's service area, and it is just taking off. In addition to that, some other programs you'll see here today. Peace Haven Farm is another one of our partners at Developing Inclusive Living. They have a table. I encourage you to go by and see them. Located in Whitsett, Guilford County, so really central part of the state. Planning to do some housing out there that will be state-of-the-art inclusive living arrangement for folks who are interested in that. And then we also have a project that we're working on right now with Easter Seals Port Health in Guilford County as well, called Francis Cove, which is smart apartment living. So Trillium commissioned around $3 million to build smart apartments. I think it's around 12 units to start with on a piece of property that was donated as part of a person's estate to Easter Seals Port Health. So some really great things on tap for us. And even with the funding cuts that are coming, we're going to do everything we can to stay true to our mission and help transform people's lives so they can live the life they want.
Thank you. It's always hard to go after Cindy. And I'm also trying to remember the question. So, which happens when you get a little older. So ditto to probably everything that my colleagues say. I think we all have the same end goal. How we get there has a lot to do sometimes with the counties that we serve, whether it's an urban county, a more rural county, the provider density in that county, other resources, amenities available. And so it seems like when we talk about the service side, people think that's the most complicated part of the conversation, and I'm here to say it's the housing side that's the most complicated part of the conversation. And, for all of us, it's when we think about how to design the systems and the partnerships and the funding that's necessary to get to permanent supportive housing. Cindy talked about kind of those 5 levels of supportive living. And, I have not really met a family, especially in the past year or so, when we've all made much more kind of focused efforts to think about what supportive housing looks like in the IDD space. Using that permanent supportive housing, which is safe, decent, affordable housing with flexible voluntary services. That's the definition of permanent supportive housing. Somebody has the benefits of signing their own lease and being responsible for paying their bills. And how does that permanent supportive housing translate to the supportive services that are necessary? and addressing kind of the different levels of ability through technology versus independence versus walkability to employment and other things. And it's hard. It's really hard. They're hard conversations. It's expensive. One of my first mentors in affordable housing said affordable housing is not cheap, and it is not cheap. And it has definitely gotten more expensive to build. And there's several of you sitting in this audience. I don't need to tell you that because you're trying to raise money for the build. So the one thing that I'll kind of add to what's already been said around the supportive services, when we try to get to supportive housing, especially permanent supportive housing, is that there's, we're in all these conversations about what does housing inventory look like, and especially in VIA, what does housing inventory look like post-disaster? What does affordable housing look like? And then what does deeply affordable housing look like? Those are not one and the same conversations. Deeply affordable housing is more expensive for a developer to build because they're generating less revenue on rent. But it's the most affordable type of housing that we can offer a lot of our members who might have SSI and other kind of more limited income through employment. And so for us at Alliance, one of the strategies that we've used over the past several years is to literally buy our way into affordable housing and make a capital investment. So last year, if you were here, you heard a little bit about our first project in partnership with Hope NC at Grosvenor Garden. If you've seen Bridgerton, you've seen Grosvenor Garden. It's lovely. It has rose bushes. It is not, and I always kind of, when we had parents of our 10 residents that lived there and came and said, oh, this is so lovely, I thought, like, don't think all affordable housing looks like Bridgerton. We got lucky in this. But making a capital investment into housing, literally buying our way in a partnership with that developer, has helped us control rents, and it has helped us control the tenant selection plan, so there's fewer barriers to accessing that, especially with income and any kind of criminal records. There's not enough money to do that as much as we would like to do that, and so, I think talking about the other access to housing strategies is really important and a big conversation at the state and with MCOs in that what types of quid pro quo can we use through HUD, through our local municipalities to create access to housing if capital investment isn't an option. And then you get to what supportive services look like. And I will say one more thing about kind of our philosophy to housing, because several years ago, we were naive enough to think that housing like that, put a period after it, we got somebody in housing, and now we think it's really about community life for people. And sometimes how they experience community life is way more important to them than the type of services that we're offering. How they find a job, how they make friends, how they learn to cook, how they go to meetups, which apparently for young people is still a thing. So that's a lot of what we're contemplating in our area.
Thank you, Anne. That was a great segue, because what I'm going to talk to you about that VIA is working on really is around how do we develop deeply affordable housing. And so, as you know, we certainly try and use any vouchers available. We partner with housing authorities. And what we know is that that's certainly not enough. And for individuals who rely on disability income and have Medicaid services and supports, it's often impossible to not live in an institution. And so VIA has decided to make one of these capital investments, like Anne was talking about, $9.6 million for the HOME program, which is housing opportunities for member engagement. And the focus of this housing is going to be scattered site housing. If you know the western side of the state, you know that we lost a tremendous amount of housing inventory due to the hurricane. And it's a difficult area to build on. We have mountains and rivers and non-perkable land. And so finding these large apartment complexes for many of our rural counties is really just not an option. There isn't the land or the resources to build these large programs. So we are committed to using our capital investment to develop, we hope, about 20 units across Western North Carolina, and really at this deeply affordable level. Many of the members that we serve do live on Social Security disability income, and often that's about $800 to $900 a month. And can you even imagine trying to live anywhere? Even if you put that full amount towards housing and utilities, you really can't afford that. So through this home initiative, our plan, we will own the property, and that 25 to 30% of income will help cover utilities, but we'll be able to really supplement with owning the properties and with that small amount that they'll be contributing each month. So we are excited about that. Part of this program, we have submitted a grant application for Dogwood Health so that we can bring additional partners to the table. And we are very hopeful that we'll get that. We should hear hopefully in the next week or so before Thanksgiving. But one of our partners is Hope NC. And so we've been working with Laura, UNC, to really bring that ideal communities lens to the program. We also hope to partner with Mountain Housing Opportunities, who are extraordinary in the Western North Carolina at building affordable housing. And also Pisgah Legal, to make sure that we really have, from their lens and their perspective, we're doing this in a way that's equitable, while also prioritizing housing for those with an IDD diagnosis. So we are thrilled about this. We're in the very early stages, but we feel it's just necessary. We will always work to utilize all the resources available, and it's not enough. So this is one way that we are jumping in, like Alliance has done in the past, to really put our money where our mouth is.
Well, that's great. I love the diversity of which I'll describe, but I think what I came away with is a couple of really high-level things. One, I love the above. Affordable housing is really not cheap, right? So that's hard to do. I love the technology side of that. It's where we have to go. And then the idea that people are buying their way in. That's really, really cool. As I mentioned in the beginning, remember, public community organizations that the LME MCOs are, that's part of their mission, and the ability to do things differently rather than just a traditional way of that is why I think the work that you're doing is so important and so thought. Also, I haven't heard the word deeply affordable housing. That's something new for me, and I think that makes perfect sense considering where people are. Now we have a couple other questions, and we're gonna split them up on the panel. So the first one is going to be for Celeste and Ann. Celeste and Ann. And here's the question. So what are the strategic objectives for the IDD housing, and where do you want to be in 5 years? What types of partnerships do you need to build? And then my favorite part of the question is, what policies need to change in order to do that? So either one of you can start. How's that?
Ann and I rock, paper, scissored. You might have seen us, so she gets to start.
Story of my life. So deeply affordable, just thank you for making note of that, Dave. Deeply affordable is 30% and below of somebody's area median income. And even, as Les was saying, with deeply affordable rents, people can be easily priced out of the market. They are also the most highly competitive units out there. So they will fill up. And then if you put a request for an accessible unit on top of that, then chances are you're waiting as long as you might be waiting for the innovations waiver. So that, thinking about kind of, we have many conversations, and lately it seems like they're mostly conversations full of doom and gloom, because things are really, they're hard. They are just harder now than I think in the 35 years that I've worked in public service. And yet, kind of when we go through times like this, because my grandmother said, this too shall pass, and however it passes and however we come out on the other side, it's hard to do that when you still feel the ground shift underneath you. And so for us, when we think about the times that we're living in that are really about scarcity, and, the reduction in federal funding, no matter which way you go, and no system, including our system, which is a hybrid of federal and state money and some local money for special projects, but mostly federal and state money, it's dominoes. You know, if you have one kind of funding cut in one area, it just dominoes into all these other areas. And so, you know, nobody pays for housing all by themselves. Nobody pays for services all by themselves. And so when I think about areas or times of scarcity, I think that it calls for a new type of collaboration. And so we're thinking about all of our unusual partners. You know, to go to a tax credit developer and try to explain how you're a Medicaid health plan and you're interested in talking to them about their low-income tax credits and the difference between 4% and 9% funding, and all of a sudden you start talking about schizophrenia and autism, and they're like, who the hell are you? And, you know, but those are the kind of conversations that become even more urgent and necessary. I think also in times like this, it is good to do another check around your public policy that sometimes creates unnecessary barriers to access services and other resources. So for us, I don't know about our 5-year plan. To be honest, sometimes it's hard for me to see beyond what's going to happen tomorrow or when the General Assembly comes back or when a new administration is in place. But when I you know, we talk a lot about where are some policy issues that we might be able to control, persuade, influence that are creating unnecessary barriers. That in times of you know, plenty, maybe it's not as important to look at those public policy issues, but in times of scarcity, you want to look at the things that won't cost any more money if you need to make those adjustments. And so we're doing a lot of advocacy around some public policy barriers that we think are highly collaborative. Like, you know, Alliance isn't going to do it by itself. We need our LME MCO partners, we need our state partners, we need our other advocacy groups to sign on to a common agenda for that. But there are definitely some out there that if we were able to revise those, I think we would definitely be able to see some additional resources come online that otherwise are not going to be able to be paid for.
Yeah, 5 years is a long time, given the complexities and many variables we're grappling with. But, you know, I would say our commitment at VIA is really to how do we use what we have and build this tapestry. And similar to what Cindy said, housing is a continuum, and where you live is a continuum just for anybody. And so for some people, living in an ICF is where they want to live and where they want to receive their care. And so how do we use the services and supports across the system in a way that we can really maximize? And I think we have some opportunities. The targeted housing program is a wonderful program. And even now, the priority populations are those in transitions to community living and money follows the person. And so one of the things that we've been working with our state partners on is how do we make sure that any unused targeted units can immediately be plugged into individuals with an IDD so that we do not let these go unused. And so I think we're making some headway on ensuring that the process can move quickly enough, because these are time limited. If you don't use them within a certain amount of time, they go back into the market. And so I think we're making some progress there. I also, you know, as we think about developing housing in Western North Carolina, we come into some gray area around, are we allowed to develop intentional communities for people with disabilities? And it's hard, and we don't want to be in a situation where CMS and North Carolina DHHS see that we are building an external institution, which can happen if you have, you know, 5 triplexes and it's an intentional community for someone with, for folks with an IDD. We could get into some real legal challenges, and I think that's the area where we need advocacy because, you know, we're not trying to build an institute. We really are trying to build intentional communities. So how can we do that in a meaningful way where people can choose to live with people like them or with not, you know, who are not like them, and And I would say in the rural counties in particular, when we don't have these large-scale housing units going up, we might need to have a triplex on a dead-end road that doesn't have neighbors. And so, and that's kind of the gray area that we are struggling with, to really make sure that we can build what we need given the geography and the community needs. So some of those legal challenges. I was happy to hear earlier that this question has went to CMS so that we can get some clarity, because right now it is gray. And so we want to do what is right for members and the community, and with the funding that we have. But we're committed to seeing this through, and appreciate the advocacy in this room, because you're part of that solution.
That's great insights. Thank you. We have one last question, and we're gonna make sure that Allison and Cindy have 8 minutes to answer this. How's that? Together. So this question is that what can families do in a location where there isn't any inclusive housing? And what role does the LME MCO have, and how can consumers help move it forward? Allison, you get to start.
You hear me all right? I'll get us started. So I think that's not an easy question, but it is an easy question. And what I mean by that is it starts with a conversation. What I would say is, if you have a question, an idea, you know somebody, reach out and let's sit down and have a conversation. Any solution that we've come up with has started with sitting down and just talking through what is the need and how might we meet the need. And I can't remember who said it, but sometimes people think it's the services that are challenged, and sometimes that is true. Like, what services can we wrap around an individual to help them, be in the home of their choice in the community. And sometimes it's about the housing, and finding the right housing that is equipped for that individual, or we have to modify that housing, right? So we have a really good pool of staff who work with individuals in living in the community in the home of their choice, whether that's their own apartment. It could be a family home that is going to be passed down to the individual. It could be a congregate living setting. And we have built a lot of relationships with landlords in our communities, whether that's a rural or urban area, and it's all about building relationships and talking to people, and getting to know them, getting to know what the needs are. And that's my suggestion, is reach out. If you don't know who to talk to and you're in one of the partners 15 counties, call me and I'll get us in touch with who the right person is. But let's start with a conversation, and and let's try to figure out. We may not get an easy solution right away, and that's I think sometimes the most frustrating thing, is that it's like you get so excited that, okay, I'm gonna have a conversation and we're gonna get a solution. That doesn't always happen, right? So it's like putting together the financial resources, the housing resources, and then of course, like I said, staff or natural supports to help that individual stay in that community. So it really starts with that conversation. We have had some really interesting and successful transition for folks into a family home that wasn't even expected to be the home for the individual, but we were able to wrap services and figure out the right funding mechanism to make that work. We've developed and built congregate group settings, particularly for young adults transitioning into adulthood. How do you support them, right? And how do you help them build out the independent living skills to the best of their ability to live independently? And maybe it needs to be in a congregate setting. So what I would say to family members and loved ones is start with that conversation. Reach out, bring your list, your questions, all of that, and let's talk it through. We may not have that solution, but we have a lot of folks that work at partners, and I would say all of our organizations, who like to solve puzzles and have built relationships with folks in the communities, because that's where we're going to be able to find the resources, is in our communities and with other organizations to build those. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to take off my Trillium hat and put on Cindy the mom hat. And just tell you a couple of little stories. So as I mentioned in my introduction, I am the mom of 3 sons who have intellectual disabilities, a 35-year-old, a 23-year-old into this week, and a 16-year-old. And they could not be more different if they had to be. Like all children, are for all families. Children are really different, regardless of this other set of labels that get put on them. When we think about how families, so I want to just draw this picture for those of you that don't know me that well. Every single time something happens with one of my children, I have 6 total, but every time something happens, I talk about it at work, right? I talk about it at the executive table at Trillium Health Resources. When something's not working right in Cameron's life, he's 35, lives in supported living in Bertie County in Windsor, which is a teeny tiny itty bitty little town in northeastern North Carolina. He's lived there for the last 8 years, very successful. But Cameron is, by some people's verbiage, low functioning. Cameron is nonverbal. He's incontinent. He has a feeding tube. He has seizures. He has all kinds of issues, yet he lives in an apartment with his best friend, Brandon, and he gets 24-hour care through supported living. He is on the innovations waiver. That did not happen because it was easy. That happened because we developed relationships. It started with a respite relationship on a weekend every quarter, and then that turned into a long-term relationship with a mom and pop provider that loves Cameron as much as we, his family, do, and cares about him as much as we do, and has made sure that he has an inclusive community, his own church community, his own friends, his own social group, his own day that he does and sometimes doesn't do because he doesn't want to. Just like me, when I don't want to work, I might call out sick. Cameron gets to do that, right? It's his life. He gets to live it. We don't decide that for him. We made the decision that Cameron would go supported living instead of ICF back when that decision got made, because he is our ward, our son. We are his guardian, all the words, right? At the end of the day, we just love him and want to make sure everything's okay. Whatever the words are, the system needs to apply to that. Good for the system. I share this story because it starts with that relationship word, right? We didn't get into the supported housing or the housing nerds, right? I did call them housing nerds. They are. I love them dearly, but they are housing nerds. We just went with sort of the more practical. How can we use his SSI to pay the rent? He does get food stamps because he's entitled to those to buy his food and to support Cameron to live the life he wants through the services he receives. And around the time, this is an interesting thing, and you'll get this point in a little bit. Around the time that Cameron moved out on the innovations waiver, his friend Brandon that I mentioned, he didn't have the waiver. He was on the wait list. And because I have the privilege, and it is a privilege, to sit at the table of Trillium's executive team, I said, you know what? This guy doesn't have a funding source. He was in DSS custody coming out of foster care. He was going into guardianship with DSS. He didn't have a family at all. What was going to happen to him? He was the same age as Cameron, in their 20s. I was like, this is crazy. So we wrote it in lieu of definition. A lot of people live independently in the community because of that in lieu of definition, because of that seat at the table. About 4 years ago, maybe 5 now, I started using Tula that I mentioned earlier with my now soon-to-be 23-year-old son, Caden. Caden's on the video if you want to check it out on YouTube, on Trillium's YouTube page, talking about his use of Tula. And I started that because Caden is a digital native. He has grown up with an iPad in his hand. He understands more about an iPad than I ever will. And Tula is a device that's very interactive the same way. And so Caden's higher functioning by the definitions of the world. I got to wrap it up. Okay, I'm going to do it. So I say this, that technology is his future. I'm not sure what Henry's is going to be at 16, but what I do know is having that seat at the table is super important. At Trillium, that's one of the difference makers. The other is that we have 5 CFAX seats on our board. And those 5 CFAC members hold us accountable for answering all the questions that this group has talked about and making sure that we make the changes necessary in Trillium's planning to support our families and members.
Guys, thank you so much. Y'all were terrific. The housing nerds did a great job. You guys did a terrific job on the side. And I think the last word we should say is, I think everybody said relationships are critical, right? So through that, we'll stop.
Thanks, Celeste, and Cindy and Alison, and Dave, you too. All right, 2 o'clock. It's me, the big ugly guy in the brown coat, keeping everybody on time. From 2 to 2:10, we have a break. The Friday Center staff understand afternoon sleepiness, and there's caffeine and sugar out there for you to get you through the afternoon breakout sessions. Afternoon breakout sessions, 2:10 to 3:25. The same 4 sessions as this morning, so the one you didn't get to go to this morning, go to that one this afternoon. At 3:30, please join us back in here for some closing remarks and the end of the day. Thanks, everyone.